guys are the same old game.
Here's Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 135 for September 20th, 2015. And hail to the victors, I'm JD Duran.
For the glory of old state, for her I'm not going to do the whole thing.
Welcome to the show, everybody. That's Brendan Cassidy.
In case you didn't know, that was the Penn State alma mater. But
I did know that.
Yeah, I know you did, because I mean we're Big Ten representatives, and I think again, Big Ten had a pretty good weekend. In fact, even better, I'd say, for our respective teams than probably before, at least for the past 2 weeks, I must say.
Yeah, Michigan was a little interesting. I see, and the thing is about the Michigan game, you see the score, and the final score was 28-7, and it's not as good as that looks. I will say I was happy to see Ohio State struggle, but we still have a long way to go. Like 28-7 it's a decent win against a really bad opponent, but man, did we really struggle offensively. But here's the thing about it, and this is what I was telling my dad and my brother when we went to the game, is Michigan has a really good defense. We have a really good running game. We have 3 legit backs that we can run at any time. But we have no quarterback. And you can't win big games without a good quarterback, and we have none of that. Our offensive throwing was just a nightmare. So,
I didn't want to say anything directly, but that's kind of why I brought up the sarcasm with the way I brought up. Like, our respective teams had great games, because I knew you were going to talk about that. I mean, I think overall they did fine. But I mean, I think you make a good point, but I guess I'm more speaking for myself, because Penn State finally showcaped that they could potentially be a force to be reckoned with. They finally have an offensive line for once, because unlike Michigan, we actually have a good QB. Christian Hackenberg is a very strong quarterback. But, you know, his blockers were giving us too much to be desired the past 2 games. But finally, 2 straight games in a row, we have let no sacks in on Hackenberg, which I'm very happy to report. So we're definitely picking up, and I'm very happy to report that.
Maybe we could make a trade somewhere down the line, Brendan. We'll take your quarterback.
I'd rather not. Don't you dare bring that up. I don't want to. Don't scare me like that, man. Come on.
Well, look, it was so disappointing, because I was sitting here talking with my dad and my brother, thinking, we could be good this year, not in 2 years or 3 years with Jim Harbaugh. We could have a really good team this year if we could just have a quarterback. But thus, my luck is not very good. So, what are you going to do?
You're not going to get ours. That's not what you're going to do.
That's very true. But I'll say it was a good day, though, because I got to spend all day Saturday with my dad and my brother, just the 3 of us hanging out. And it was a really, really glorious day overall, even though we were dead tired by the end of it. And not only did Michigan win, but my dad, who is from Mississippi, is a big Ole Miss fan. So clearly he had a great night as well, as Ole Miss beat Alabama. So he was just having a fun day overall.
Oh, my God. Beating the Roll Tide, man. Who would expect that?
I know. And see, he grew up the way that I grew up, liking the Lions, where Ole Miss has always been terrible. And then all of a sudden, these last couple of years, it's like, oh my God, they're showing promise of actually being good. So, anyway.
It's bound to happen at some point in your life. It's just, when and where it happens within your lifetime is kind of, I guess, the moot point. But
yeah, and speaking of the Lions, I think I've given up after today's loss, so I will just stick to college football the rest of the year.
I feel like it's more fun to talk about college football. Steelers had a fine day, but we don't need to talk about your Lions.
Anyway, let's talk movies, because we do have that on this show as well.
We are a movie podcast.
We are. And after being guestless last week, we do have a really great guest on the show this week, as we are going to be joined by Cody from CineSnob. Cody, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back. It means that I didn't bomb my first appearance too much.
No, you were very good. Very good. Well, we talked Love and Mercy, I believe, the last time you were on.
Yeah.
One of my favorite films of the year so far. So glad you're back. Thanks for putting up with our football talk here at the beginning.
We do that all the time. Like, I would say 40% of our podcast has nothing to do with movies.
It's that time of year.
Yeah,
It's okay.
it is that
It's
time of
okay.
year, yeah, exactly. And football in Texas, good or not good this year?
Well, you guys were talking college football. So the school that I went to and follow, I'm a season ticket holder of, but we're actually only in the 5th year of the program.
Oh,
so I've been watching it from the ground up. We're in Conference USA, and Oklahoma State put 69 points on us this week. So
Hey, you're building and you're growing, so you're gonna have those growing pains.
We got Larry Coker as our coach, though. So
yeah, there you go. Definitely
bad start.
name that's been around for a while. Absolutely. So anyway, thanks for joining us. We really do appreciate it. So this week on the show, we are going to be getting down and dirty and all gangstery as we review Johnny Depp's latest film, Black Mass. And going off of that, we're going to be talking about our top 3 movie gangsters. And for our discussion segment this week, we're going to be doing a new segment called Best and Worst as we look at the career of Johnny Depp. And as the title alludes to, we're going to be discussing his best and worst performances. And that, well, at least should be interesting, if anything else. So, a lot to talk about, guys. Let's get into it.
And here we go.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 135. Brendan, what's the secret family recipe?
The rum. Why's the rum gone?
And Morris, what did you marinate the steak in? Because it's out of this world. You're killing me with it.
No.
It's a family secret. Oh.
Come on, you gotta tell me that. Come on, you could do it. Come on. What's the family secret recipe?
It's ground garlic and a little bit of soy.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it.
I thought it was a family secret.
It's a recipe.
No. You said to me, this is a family secret, and you gave it up to me. Boom. Don't look to John, because he's not gonna help you. You spill the secret family recipe today, maybe you spill about me tomorrow. Is that something maybe that's a possibility?
All right, Black Mass is directed by Scott Cooper and stars Johnny Depp, Joel Edgerton, Benedict Cumberbatch, Dakota Johnson, and a whole slew of other people that we'll get into. We'll toss it to you first, Cody. What did you think about Johnny Depp and his makeup once again, but this time in Black Mass?
Yeah, it's so great to actually enjoy a Johnny Depp and makeup movie for the first time in a long time.
For sure, yeah.
He's pretty phenomenal in this. I was really impressed. It's a very scary character, and I think, and I guess I'll talk about it a little bit later when we have the 3 gangsters, but I think the best gangsters in movies are the ones where they're either hotheads or you never know what's going to come next and it's unexpected, and there's just sort of like a sense of dread every time that Depp is on screen, and his unpredictability is really the best feature of the character that he plays. really, I think that he is he's the reason for admission here. I think there's some other good performances here. I think that Joel Edgerton is really good.
Sure.
And also kind of like the unsung hero for me, in my opinion, was Jesse Plemons, who we were actually talking about this on our podcast, because me and my friend both had the same thought of when he started speaking at the very beginning and had his Boston accent, it was like a reincarnated Matt Damon, and it was so weird for a few minutes.
Sure.
Their resemblance is really similar, and that Boston accent was perfect. But I think that the acting is probably the greatest strength of the film. I think when it gets a little bit deeper, it becomes a little bit more basic. It never really feels like a really great look into the world that they live in. I mean, there's some really complex relationships going on here. Between Whitey and the FBI and his brother, and I don't think that it's ever explored to any great deal. And I don't know that they provide much context to what was going on at that time, and not only context for that, but kind of what they do. I mean, other than some pretty violent acts, you don't see a lot of criminal activity happening, and so I think it's a little bit difficult to place context within it. And I just think there's a scene, not a scene. There's a part of the movie involving his son, and then when that plot line goes away, I think it just becomes kind of generic. And I think that it's good. I liked it, but I think that it's kind of a missed opportunity to have like a really solid entry into this genre.
Okay, what about you, Brendan?
So the first thing I'll bounce off of is this is probably Johnny Depp's best performance in. I can't even remember when he's given a good performance. It's
been a while, yeah.
It's been a while, but that is a fact. Now, I think it goes without saying that not only Johnny Depp, but all the performances in this movie are objectively good. I think a lot of them are. So without spending too much time talking about that, I want to talk about the movie itself. And God forbid I'm going to talk a little bit more about football again, because we spent so much time talking about it in the opening. But with this movie taking place in Boston, I'm going to use the New England Patriots as an example. This movie, for me, was like watching a game of the New England Patriots playing someone like, I don't know, the Tennessee Titans. But you had people like Tom Brady and Gronkowski sitting on the bench for most of the game. That was how it was for me watching this movie. It was so uneventful. I feel like that this movie was devoid of almost any kind of conflict, and for the most part, I didn't find many character arcs going on that I personally found all that interesting. This is a movie where by about the halfway point, I found myself checking the time almost every 5 minutes. I was so bored during this film, and it's not that it's bad, it's just the fact that it felt like it was so devoid of it's not that it's devoid of conflict, but I feel like it's devoid of really a consistent conflict that's really driving the whole undercurrent of this film overall, that I had a very difficult time engaging with it. But at the same time, like watching a sports game like that I just used, the players themselves are still phenomenal in their own right, just like the actors themselves are still phenomenal in their own right. They all give very good performances here. But for me, it was like, so what? Where am I? What am I latching on to? In which, for me, it just wasn't quite there. Cody, you mentioned the word generic, and I think that's a pretty good word here. In fact, I found it even more generic and more by the numbers maybe than you did. I'm not sure, but it was to the point that I had a very, very difficult time engaging with this movie, very emotionally, or even from a suspense standpoint. I think a lot of it just didn't really land for me, and I was really disappointed by this film. I was very bored by it, which is kind of disappointing to say because, as I mentioned, the performances here are very good. I think it comes down mostly to Scott Cooper more than anything else. I think the direction is very bland. The writing is not very interesting, and there's nothing really going on underneath as far as character arcs and conflict to really keep me going. So, big disappointment for me. It's very unfortunate to say.
Well, the first thing that I'll say is I really do like Scott Cooper overall as a director. I really liked his film Crazy Hearts. I was probably bigger on Under the Furnace than most people were. So for that reason, I was excited for this. Going into the film, I was also a little bit at a distance because I was nervous about them glorifying this character. And that being said, a lot of crime films are inevitably going to make the crime and its characters look cool. That's just what this genre does. However, this is so fresh that it's hard for me not to think about the people and the victims that are still healing from this. So I was a little bit at a distance, even though I was excited for the movie overall. That being said, in the end, I actually quite liked this movie. And for me, I liked it because of its subtlety. Brendan, you're talking about how it's uneventful. I think a football comparison that I would throw in here is like that first half of the Alabama-Ole Miss game from this last weekend where it was all defense. There wasn't a whole lot of scoring. There was a lot of punting. There was a few turnovers here and there. But for me, it was that old school defensive approach football game that I like. I'm not into this 69-60 football games. That's just not me. So for me with this film, that's how it felt to me. It was kind of some old school subtle filmmaking that I liked. And I felt like Scott Cooper was more interested in chewing up scenery and adding just the right amount of attention without going overboard or bringing lots of energy and violence into it that you see in so many other gangster films. I felt like if it would have gone that route, then it would have headed into generic territory that for me would have been disengaging. So for me, I liked its methodical and subtle approach here. I also liked the framing of this movie too. It kind of felt like a pseudo documentary in some ways, as we see Bulger's closest confidants giving testimonies against him. I think Cooper limits how much time we spent there, so it's not full of too much exposition, but it helps push the narrative forward, and we get more into the psyche of those supporting characters, which I like. And again, I think the performances are pretty good, so I'll agree with you there. I'll get more into Depp here in a little bit, but overall, I will agree with you guys. He's doing more here than we've ever seen him do in such a long time. I like Cam and Joel Edgerton quite a bit. And saying all of that, this is not a perfect movie. It certainly has its flaws. One of the biggest flaws that stand out for me are a couple of scenes that are making homages to the Goodfellas and The Godfather, which felt a little bit too specific for me and were only there for the references. I don't think they added much to the story. So that kind of took me out of the film a little bit. But overall, I'll leave my last thoughts here and I'll toss it back to you guys, is when I was reading a review from Christopher Orr from The Atlantic, he ended his review by saying this: Black Mass is not a classic, but such comparisons aside, this is a case where it is unwise to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And that's pretty much how I feel about this movie.
And when you mean by that, I guess when that review is talking about quote unquote the perfect, basically trying to compare this film to like The Godfather or The Goodfellas.
Yes.
Okay, because even taking that comparison aside for me, like, I found no character in this film interesting at all, and that was my biggest problem as to why I can't jump on your side. I'm glad you were able to take something from it though, and I kind of like your football comparison because it's a little different. I could see kind of where you're coming from because it's definitely more of a quote unquote defensive film, especially in the first half before it kind of leads into a different territory in the second half. But
yeah, sure.
I could never ever engage with anything going on here. It's so drab and so dry. And in my opinion, I don't think any character in this film has any arc to them. I feel like hardly anyone had any development or motivation. And I think the way that it kind of intercuts between, these confessional moments between ex-members, quote unquote, of the Hill Gang, I think really detracted it from me because I did not know who these people were at this time yet. And it introduces Jesse Plemons, who we don't even ever get to know in the film, in my opinion. I feel like he's only in the movie for like 5 minutes. So on that note, I also found the movie kind of a bit, jumbled, almost kind of messy in that regard from a character standpoint. So I'm glad you can definitely see this from it, but I just could not jump on that side.
I think you bring up a decent point about the lack of arcs, though. I think that they tried to give Depp an arc here, and then they just kind of punched out of it and kind of left it aside. And I do wonder if maybe part of the problem at least from my perspective, was maybe they spent too much time with the FBI and with Edgerton, and like introducing characters late in the film, like Corey Stoll is introduced with maybe like 20 minutes left in the movie, and doesn't really give a chance to make any impact. And I almost wonder if they also maybe kept Depp a little bit too reserved and didn't use him enough. Like maybe it should have been more about him and less about the FBI, especially when that story kind of sputtered a little bit. And when I was mentioning context, another thing I mean is that, the main part of the story is, that the FBI was basically allowing him to run Boston, but yet we see none of that really. I mean, we see Bolger as this really evil and scary figure, but we don't see the impact beyond like the general mob wars that he's getting into. We don't see the impact on the streets of Boston in terms of like the neighborhood and stuff like that. And I wonder if maybe that would have been a better movie than the one that happened.
Well, I will agree with you guys. I don't want to get, I guess, too ahead of myself, because I agree with you that there aren't a ton of story arcs here. And there's a lot of characters in this film, so you can't really go into everyone very thoroughly. So I will agree with you guys there. But for me, and maybe I didn't make this clear enough, what I liked about this film is the performances are obviously very, very good. And it's just telling this story pretty straightforward. It's not trying to do anything fancy. In fact, from what I've read, a lot of what is told here is pretty to the facts of the case. There's a few things that are rearranged here and there, but it's pretty straightforward. It's just telling a story of this guy's rise to power and then his downfall. That's pretty much all it is. But for me, it was the filmmaking and the performances that kept me engaged. It was doing things different within the genre that I appreciate. Maybe that doesn't make sense, but that's the best way I can articulate it. I just got out of seeing this movie like 2 hours ago, so I'm still formulating all my thoughts. But from my point of view, I liked what Scott Cooper was doing with the story, as straightforward as it is, giving us great methodical pacing and filmmaking, not making it too boisterous or too energetic, but just solid, subtle filmmaking that let the actors do what the actors do. And for me, that's what I appreciate about this, because so many crime films do the opposite of that. They want to give us lots of energy, lots of violence, and lots of crime, and we see little of that. And we could have seen more context and all that sort of stuff, but it's doing little things differently that for me is what stands out for me in this movie.
And I could definitely see your point, JD. And I would argue, though, that I as much as I respect what Scott Cooper is doing here, I don't think it's well earned then, because I think the only way that subtlety could work for me is if I really actually dramatically cared about these characters, because I really didn't, and I couldn't quite get that point. I think the best comparison to another movie, I think the best comparison I could think of to another movie is actually another biopic that came out last year, and that was Angelina Jolie's Unbroken, which I found that film to be kind of uneventful because I didn't really care about any of the characters in that film. And I think that's now that film is not subtle at all. That's a very glossy, and I mean, we call that movie having kind of a glossy shine to it, because it's definitely trying to appeal to the quote unquote Oscar bait, which this film is not trying to do. It's definitely trying to go for this kind of raw and gritty sensibility to it that also feels very honest and simple, as you're talking about. But at the same time, I think that only works if I am dramatically invested in these characters. Otherwise, I personally feel like this just would have worked better. This just would have worked better as a documentary, like we said about the movie Unbroken. And walking out of this film, I really thought I would have much rather seen this story as a documentary, because I think I would have been more, compelled by it if it was going to take this simplistic approach, because I think that's where Scott Cooper kind of failed, and I think he let the simplicity maybe get the better of him, and he got kind of bogged down in that simplicity because he knew he wanted to do that. What you appreciate about the film is absolutely what he's trying to do here. I think just the other little things that I think he couldn't quite do is where I had a lack of engagement to it, that I'm like I said, I'm happy that you were able to find that, but that's where it was really limited for me.
Well, you're in luck, Brendan, because there was a documentary about this that came out last year called Whitey, and it's pretty good. You should go and check it out. And perhaps that's part of the reason why the lack of context didn't matter to me, because I had seen that documentary. It explores a lot of the context really well. So I knew it going in, and so when it wasn't there, I already knew what was going on, so it was fine for me.
That's a good point.
On top of that, another thing that really resonates for me in this, and going back to some of the quote-unquote lack of story arcs, the one that did resonate for me was the one with John Connolly, played by Joel Edgerton, because lots of crime films does the same as this one when it's exploring these notions of loyalty and trust. And for me here, thematically, it doesn't feel like it's overbearing on those notions comparatively to the main narrative beats of this movie. But it still focuses on that loyalty and how it can burn you. And for John Connolly specifically, he kind of just turns a blind eye to all the crime, and he embraces this loyalty, which become his main motivations. In fact, at one point, he has a line he says to his wife where he says, "Loyalty means a lot to me," which is really ironic because he says it right after a scene where we see him cheating on his wife in Miami. But the point was still made that he was very loyal to Whitey Bulger. And at one point we hear through voiceover how Whitey Bulger doesn't like rats. Of course, any crime mob doesn't like rats. And he goes on to say that all of them need to be exterminated, which of course is going to call for massive loyalty. However, in the end, what's really interesting to me, especially with the John Connolly character, in the end, everybody around him gave up Bulger on some level, except for John Connolly. He still wouldn't give up Bulger on any level, which is really interesting to me because the feds probably knew everything anyway by that point, yet he still embraces his loyalty to this guy. And it cost him 50 years because he was sentenced to 50 years because he didn't make any plea deal. Everyone else did. Even Bulger's closest confidants gave him up on some level, but not Connolly. And at what point does loyalty need to be betrayed for the sake of the good or for the sake of your family even? And I found that notion of blind loyalty, how that cost Connolly and everyone around him, not just himself, really fascinating. And to me, that arc, I guess, is probably the biggest one of the movie, and I found it really interesting by the end.
I agree to a point, but then, I mean, I hate to keep going back to context, but I don't know that they showed that he had any reason to be loyal. And so maybe that's why it didn't
he grew
connect.
up with him. They've said that a million times, that they grew up in the same neighborhood together. They even say at the beginning that Bulger essentially saved him a couple times as a kid. I think that's all the context you really even need.
Yeah, and I wasn't, since it's happened off screen, maybe I didn't remember it that well.
Sure.
But I get that, and I also do you think that any of it was fear-based? Do you think he feared him at all?
No, I think all of Connolly's motivations was very selfish. I think he was wanting to use Bulger to make his way up the ranks of the FBI, take down these other crime families while using someone that he knew could get him there, and vice versa. It was the same thing from Bulger's point of view as well. But the entire time in the middle of that, all of his excuses came back to loyalty. I'm loyal to this guy. I grew up with this guy. He can help me. He's someone that we can trust. And obviously, as an audience member, you know that's not true.
Yeah, and I kind of going back to, I guess, what Cody was trying to say, because we're simply told that they grew up together, that, Billy Bulger, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, as well as, Whitey and then John Connolly all grew up together. It's never something we actually feel that sense of camaraderie between them, if that makes any sense. And I think that's where I could side with both you guys as to, why that arc would work for someone versus someone else, why it wouldn't, because a lot of things in this movie, not just this as an example, we're simply told through like little moments of exposition, then we're just kind of meant to kind of accept it. I mean, we are supposed to accept it because it's true, but for a movie that's meant to be told as a movie and not as a documentary, I think it helps if we can actually feel that sense of growing up. And that was where I felt a little limited and while that arc is definitely there, I could definitely see your point, JD, and those themes about loyalty are definitely the most prevalent as far as taking something thematically from this film. it wasn't an emotional connection to that theme for me personally, because I never really felt that sense of what you're talking about. And on top of that, as much as I like Joel Edgerton as an actor, like most of the characters in this film, I still didn't find the character all that interesting by this point in the film. This was the most interesting aspect, but I still felt like I hadn't gotten a chance to really know the guy yet by this point in the film, which is kind of a shame to say, because at this point in the film, you're at the last third of the film already, and I still feel like I hadn't gotten the chance to really get to know him. And I could say that about a lot of the characters, which is really why the film overall just didn't quite work for me. But really, that's just me.
Well, it certainly has that biopic formula in terms of the characters' arcs. I don't disagree that we could have used more depth there, but for what it's doing, especially compared to a lot of biopics, Unbroken you brought up, there's a million of them we could bring up. I feel like this one is doing more than those, even though, certainly we could have used a lot more. And what you're talking about in terms of not feeling that camaraderie, I think just makes those notions even more interesting to me, that even if the John Connolly character growing up with James Bulger, even if they hadn't seen each other in a long time, let's say, and they wanted you to feel that, like he knows him, but they haven't been around each other in a while, but now they're going to use each other, so to speak. It makes that idea even more robust to me, that Connolly would not give him up. Why would he not give him up if that's the case? He's going to be that loyal to a guy he hasn't seen in a while. That is just crazy to me, but it does show how loyal he was and how much that friendship really meant to him, regardless of the length of time. Even if he hasn't seen him in a while, he was still going to be loyal to the end. And it's just really interesting to me that he would choose to do that. And it makes those notions even more resonant, that I found captivating about that character, at least. Certainly could have been explored a little bit more, but I still find it really interesting. So on that note, let's get to final thoughts and grades. Let's toss it to you first, Cody. Any final thoughts, and what grade would you give Black Mass?
For just a final thought, I think that for Depp's performance alone, and the fact that great Johnny Depp performances are so few and far between right now, and so to see a guy really show what he's capable of is I think this movie is worth it just for that. I think that it's an okay entry into this genre. I don't think it's a world class entry, but I would give it a B minus. And I think that it's good enough to merit a watch for sure.
Okay, what about you, Brennan?
Geez, I feel like I'm going to be even harsher than I thought on this film now. I guess the last thing I'll say is that, when we were first tossing the film and starting to talk about this, we mentioned a few of the actors in this film. One of them that you mentioned that I personally think gives the best performance in this movie is Dakota Johnson. I think the best performance in this entire film is that small amount of screen time that she has, especially around the conflict of their son. And while that's a conflict that is very much kind of not really resolved, it's kind of like partially resolved and abandoned, and then goes on to a few other things. While that is going on, she sells it. And I really think she gives the best performance in this movie. That was where I finally started feeling any sort of dramatic tension within this film. But aside from her, I mean, there are a lot of recognizable actors within this film. You've got Adam Scott, you've got Corey Stoll, as we mentioned, in a few. Peter Sarsgaard has a small part in here, and I mentioned Benedict Cumberbatch already as Whitey Bulger's brother. I think for the most part, a lot of these actors are very much wasted in this film. I think with Benedict Cumberbatch, I think the best thing he does in this film is showcase that he can do a Boston accent. Aside from that, I didn't really see much out of him, and I felt like that a lot with the other characters. I think it's not so much it's a fault to the writing or the actors themselves. It's just at a certain point, I feel like the movie got so crowded that there wasn't enough room for any of these characters really to breathe, and that's maybe where a lot of the lack of arc that I felt kind of stemmed from. It's almost a movie that I think they would have added time to it, if they allowed maybe more time and allowed a running time to be stretched a bit and allowed more room for these characters to kind of breathe within this world and within each other, I probably could come more on your side, JD. But as it is, I can't quite recommend this movie. It just came off as way too drab and there was lacking of dramatic depth for me that I just couldn't quite engage with it. So I would probably give it like a C at best. I can't quite recommend it, even though the performances themselves are quite excellent, but it didn't amount to much for me, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, I think maybe that's why most crime movies are 3 hours long, because you need that time to develop these characters.
Touche.
One thing I want to talk about is Johnny Depp. He's, of course, very heavily featured here. I do think he's pretty good. And, of course, he's in a little bit of makeup. He actually kind of reminded me of older Charles Kane and Citizen Kane a little bit. But I do feel like Depp is doing more than just bringing mannerisms and makeup to this movie. I think he does become this character, and I think he does a pretty good job of filling out the screen. It's not one of those performances in this genre that will stack up as the best of all time, but I do think it's pretty good, especially when you compare that to some of his recent performances,
Dark Shadows,
have been pretty awful. But here's the thing, and I've always said this about Johnny Depp. He is good when he takes himself serious. And a lot of those roles, he's just being silly and goofy, and it comes off as that. But when he takes himself serious, I do think he's very talented, and he showcases that here. In the movie, they also tried to humanize the Bulger character a little bit with some of the stuff you guys were talking about with his son. He does have this girlfriend. His mom is even in this movie a little bit. And I will say, I think a lot of that stuff is needed to bring depth to the character. However, I couldn't help but feel a little bit jarred by it because this is a guy that is a monster and he doesn't deserve my sympathy. And because this is pretty fresh in our minds, I couldn't help but feel a little bit jarred by that. Now, perhaps in time when it's not so fresh, then this will work on a different level because we do see that kind of stuff in other crime movies. In fact, I'm going to talk about some of that in our top 3. But because of the freshness, I couldn't help but feel a little bit disengaged because of that. However, this is a guy that still has feelings, and I think those moments of humanity do come through enough that it worked for me. And from a storytelling standpoint, it's needed here. And I will say those scenes of humanity are of course juxtaposed with a lot of scenes of violence and murder. I think those scenes of violence and murder are handled really well for me because they're not over the top and overly dramatic. For me, it all goes back to that subtle filmmaking that I like. But through that subtle filmmaking, we still see that this is a ruthless guy who's willing to kill and do whatever is necessary. And I think it makes his best scene stand out for me where Johnny Depp's best and most riveting scene comes in an unexpected private moment where he is having dinner with the John Connolly character, and Bulger notices that Connolly's wife isn't at the dinner table, and John says that she's not feeling well, and Bulger calls out that bluff, and he goes to see Connolly's wife, played wonderfully by Julianne Nicholson, and the encounter gets pretty gripping pretty fast for me. And again, it's subtle and it's plausible, but we see a new side of Bulger there that we haven't seen before. He's very intimidating without being overly violent. In fact, he's not really being violent at all. But what's brilliant about the scene to me is how Cooper keeps the camera on Nicholson's reaction the entire time. And man, is she wonderful in that moment. She absolutely sells it, and it says everything about that character that I really needed to know. I think he was absolutely wonderful. So like those kind of scenes, I think really stand out to me. It's suspenseful enough. It kept me on the edge of my seat without being overly violent like we see in this genre all the freaking time. And for that made this movie fresh for me. A couple of criticisms real fast, and I'll give my grade. The female characters, while I like Dakota Johnson, I think she's wonderful in this as well, Brendan, but none of the female characters are fleshed out very well. They are the most wasted of all of the characters here for me, and we needed to see more exploration there. Cumberbatch, I think, is actually kind of bad in this movie. I didn't buy his Boston accent at all. I think his performance was actually pretty lacking here, and his character doesn't play into the central plot at all, and being the brother of the main character, I kind of wish we would have seen more of that. So there's definitely more we could talk about. I'm going to give this a B+. I still think for what this film is doing for the biopic genre, I would take this any day of the week over something like The Theory of Everything or The Imitation Game, Unbroken, all that crap we got last year. So I actually would recommend this. It's definitely not the best in the genre, but it's worth giving a watch, even if just for the performances and subtle direction alone. So anyway, if you want to go read more of my thoughts, you can go and check out our Letterboxd page at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm.
And if you agree or disagree with what we had to say about Black Mass, you can let us know by leaving a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/InSessionFilm, or you can tweet us at InSessionFilm. You can also leave us a comment on our Google Plus page, or you can email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com.
All right, the InSession Film Top 3 is next, and we'll be discussing our top 3 movie gangsters.
Funny how.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back. The InSession Film Top 3 is brought to you by the First Time Watchers podcast. And Brendan, of course, we just got done talking about Black Mass. And I gotta say, just like that movie and what I was talking about with it thematically, the First Time Watchers podcast is very loyal to us, and we're very loyal to them.
Absolutely, and sometimes they can scare the living out of us, just like Johnny Depp does in that film.
Exactly.
Not all the time.
No.
But what we will say is that you're absolutely right as far as loyalty, though. They're a great supporter of our show and definitely a podcast you guys got to check out there. Hosted by Tim, Walter, and Hermano. Then not only do they know their movies, they are loyal to their knowledge of movies.
Absolutely. And their banter is very amazing. It's very entertaining. Unlike some other Johnny Depp movies we'll talk about later in the show, but some of his stuff is very entertaining. Regardless of that, first-time watchers, guys, are always on point.
Yeah, and they're also a very unique show, very much like some of the uniqueness of Johnny Depp's performances, whether it be good or bad. We'll talk about that later. But what is unique is that every week they'll pick out a movie that they've never seen it before, watch it, and discuss it on their show to create this real fresh perspective in their discussion. And they'll also talk about other trailers that they've seen recently, other movies that they've seen recently, so it really creates a great, fresh show about movies.
Absolutely, and they give some great recommendations at the end of the show that I would also pay attention to. And overall, the show is just very fluid, it's smart, it's so easy to listen to, and you can just tell that their chemistry is top-notch and that they are having a lot of fun, and so you will as well as a listener. So, that being said, Brendan, where can you find these guys on the internet?
There are a couple ways. You can find them on firsttimewatchers.blogspot.com and also hit them up on Twitter at First Time Watchers, and also on Facebook. Just search for First Time Watchers.
And go subscribe to them on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave them a review and let them know that we sent it to them. I promise it's absolutely worth the time. Go check them out. Again, that's First Time Watchers.
Like intelligent and smart movie discussion.
Base is a zombie movie.
How did he write a book if he doesn't have an arm?
Or want to hear the latest news on your favorite actor?
Talk some Julianne Moore, I guess.
Whales have more films than Zoe Saldana.
Then check out the Lambcast, where no question is too risque.
Rachel, do you have a mouth?
Check out the Lambcast, the official podcast of the Lamb, the large association of movie blogs, which can be found at largeassmovieblogs.blogspot.com. Si habla español.
Hola y bienvenido a la
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 135, and now after just discussing Black Mass, we're going to be talking about our top 3 favorite movie gangsters. Before we get going, let's talk about any specific rules or criteria that we may have had to pick our lists. I'll toss it to you first, Cody. Any criteria that you used to pick your list this week, man?
Not really. I kind of opened it up a little because I actually tend to like prison movies more than I like the traditional like gangster movie. So one of my picks is a prison movie that has a gang within the prison.
Sure.
So.
Oh, no, that's actually a really good way to think outside the box. I didn't even think about that. So I'm actually really excited to hear what you have to say about that. Look forward to it. How about you, JD?
Well, I'm calling this my I gave him an offer he couldn't refuse memorial list. I'm going to...
I wonder what movie you're talking about there. I've never heard of that quote before.
I know, right? There's going to be a couple off my list that are pretty obvious. I wanted to kind of look at films that I don't want to say are outside the box, but just films that we haven't discussed on the show before. So that's kind of where I was looking at. And also I kept the term gangs within the crime field genre a little bit. I think it'd be easy to spin that off a little bit like Cody did, which I think is really interesting. Prison movies certainly could fit this, but you could also go even more silly with it. Like, let's say the Avengers, that's a gang of superheroes. I didn't want to go that route. So.
That's very outside the box.
Very much. So I didn't want to do that either. So I kept it at least a little traditional in the crime film genre a little bit.
Yeah, I'm definitely on your, I guess a little more on your side, JD. And I think one thing I want to clarify, because this is something you and I talked a little bit about offline, was what the term quote unquote gangster really means. Because, you know, after talking about a movie like Black Mass, it's pretty easy to assume that gangster could be kind of synonymous with mobster, and that's not really what we're doing. I mean, I guess there's definitely going to be a little bit of tradition here with my list as what you're kind of talking about, JD, but I wanted to be able to think a little bit outside the box and focus on a bit of the crime world, specifically from a genre standpoint in movies, but not specifically mobsters. You know, there are other types of, you know, criminals in certain types of gangs, but it doesn't need to be a mob. So I kind of looked at that a little bit. I just want to make that a little bit clear. And it sounds like all three of us are going to think a little bit outside the box, taking that into consideration. So I think with on that note, though, I think we should get going, because I think we have some pretty diverse things to talk about. So I look forward to it. So I'll toss it to you first, Cody. What do you have at number 3?
So number 3 is sort of my outside the box pick, which is Tahar Rahim in A Prophet, the French film from a few years back.
Nice. 2009.
You know, the film sort of resonated with me, and it's like this long spanning epic. It's like 2.5 hours long, and Audiard, I don't know how to say his name in a French way, but I really like that guy as a director. You know, I loved Rust and Bone. I love A Prophet, and you know, I just love kind of the sort of rise that happens in A Prophet, and how you see this, you know, character development. And yeah, that's one that sort of, and you know, I went through it and tried to think of the best kind of prison gang or prison mafia movie, and that is the one that sort of stuck out to me as being my personal favorite.
That's interesting, because myself and JD just got finished watching this film for the first time not too long ago in preparation for our best of the decade list that we did.
Yeah.
And JD, I think you liked the movie a lot more than I did, but I think needless to say, we both ended up enjoying this film quite a bit. And I did consider this pick as something to at least take into consideration for this list, because I don't think you're terribly far out of the box. I think this is definitely one you could definitely consider for this, and I think it's a very good pick.
It's not just a good pick, Cody, and you're not outside of the box, but it's also my number 3. I also had this on my list as well. So here's the thing. When I was thinking of this pick, though, I really wasn't even honestly thinking of it in terms of a prison movie. It certainly takes place, at least a lot of the movie, within the walls of a prison, but a lot of it, at least character speaking, it's more about this gang and about this character within this gang and how he kind of starts out at the very bottom, and by the end he kind of rises to the top, so to speak. And there's been a lot of comparisons to this film as far as something like The Godfather with the Al Pacino character and those movies. And I can certainly see why people would make that comparison. And the big difference between this and those movies for me, and not to say that this movie is on the Godfather kind of level. I'm not necessarily making that comparison, but what I will say is that A Prophet is more of a satisfying watch for me. The way that he rises to the top and the way that he kind of plays the back doors, I'll say without spoilers, it's a little bit different than the way that we see Michael Corleone do it. And in the end, it's not about violence. It's not about being ruthless, but it's more about being smart. And to me, that was really riveting about that film and about that character of Malik, played by Tahar Rahim. And I think the first thing I said on Letterboxd, and I texted you this too, Brendan, as soon as I saw it, I said, this was my favorite performance of 2010 or whenever that movie came out. I loved it. I think he was absolutely brilliant, and it was so methodical. It was perfectly well placed. It's a long movie, but you stick with it at the very end. It has one of the most satisfying endings for any gangster film I've ever seen.
I can definitely agree with that. I think one of my criticisms of the film, I thought the film was a little too long, but I think thinking about
things are too long, they're too short, nothing's good enough for you, Brendan.
Well, okay, let me say this. I think I have to kind of eat some of those words, because I think part of the reason why the film does work so well is because the fact that it is long, it helps feel that passage of time that you're talking about, and I think that's something that makes that rise of power that he's going through feel that much more well-earned by the film's climax. And I think that's why the performance is so rewarding in the end, because I agree. I think it is definitely one of the best physical performances of that year. As much as I loved Colin Firth and what was it, The King's Speech, I think that it came out that same year.
Yeah.
I think there's more you could take away methodically, like you're talking about, from this film, from the lead performance here. But I think it's a great pick, guys, and I'm glad to see it at least represented on this list. It's an honorable mention for me, so it won't quite make my list. So I'm glad we at least got the chance to talk about it. And coincidentally, you guys had it at number 3.
That was really funny. I really going into this, I knew you probably wouldn't have it, Brendan. I don't know Cody well enough to think that he would put it on here. And as soon as he said it, I had like the biggest smile on my face. I wish you guys
that's pretty awesome.
Oh my gosh. Amazing. Love it.
That's good to hear. Good to hear. Anyway, for my number, well, actually, before I get to my number 3, I did forget to mention something as far as my criteria, because JD, you mentioned that this was going to be your Godfather memorial list.
Yeah.
This is going to be my Goodfellas memorial list, because Goodfellas is probably my very favorite quote-unquote gangster/mobster movie, whatever you want to call it. And it'd be way too easy for me to include someone like a Tommy DeVito or someone like that on this list. So I couldn't quite do that. So I just want to make that clear before I get going. So people out there, don't hate me if I don't have someone like that on my list.
Yeah, for sure.
But anyway, kind of going a little bit out of the box for my number 3, I kind of thought about, what about, I guess, assassins that are part of a gang? Like, how do these people kind of react? And one of my very favorite films of the past decade, that I think is one of the most underrated films of the past decade, was Martin McDonagh's In Bruges.
Yeah,
and I'm going to be talking about kind of a tie here, but the characters of Ray and Ken, played by Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson in the movie In Bruges. And these guys are my number 3.
Bruges is not a shithole. Bruges is a shithole. Ray, we've only just got off the fucking train. Could we reserve judgment on Bruges until we've seen the fucking
I know it's going to be a shithole. Ken, I grew up in Dublin. I love Dublin. If I'd grown up on a farm and was retarded, Bruges might impress me. But I didn't, so it doesn't.
Harry, let's face it. And I'm not being funny. I mean, no disrespect. But you're a cunt. You're a cunt now. You've always been a cunt. And the only thing that's going to change is you're going to become an even bigger cunt. Maybe have some more cunt kids.
Leave my kids f***ing out of it. What have they done? You f***ing retract that bit about my cunt f***ing kids.
I retract that bit about your cunt f***ing kids.
You insulted my f***ing kids? That's going overboard, mate.
I retracted it, didn't I?
I just think it's so interesting to hear the perspective of an assassin, but both of them have a conscience. It's and the way that the film kind of balances that drama and the very pitch black humor that's intertwined within this film just helps make these characters so quirky and so interesting, but you really care deeply for what they're going through. You feel so bad for what the Ray character played by Colin Farrell is going through because of a past mistake that he made, and the dedication that Ken still has for him, that it really sparks a sense of a friendship between them, kind of a brotherhood between them, I think is quite beautiful in many ways, and how they both kind of simultaneously stand up to their boss, played by Ray Fiennes, who is hilarious in this film. I'll never forget one of my favorite quotes of any movie from last year is, "You're an inanimate object." It's just, I lose it every time that happens. But the movie is so funny, and it's so dramatic, and it balances it so well. But I think these two characters really do a good job showcasing the idea that, you know, these kind of people are human. You know, they do have a conscience, and I like that notion that's explored very well here. So, and on top of that, they're so damn entertaining to watch on screen together, Ray and Ken, and for that reason, I have to include it. So that's why these two guys are my number 3.
Yeah, that's a great pick. I love In Bruges, and I think that one of the things that you sort of talked about is that it's not only is the script amazing for this film, but like it is so perfectly cast. Like those, you could not imagine two better people in those roles, and especially Gleason, who is as sad and tragic of an arc that Colin Farrell's role is. Gleason's character is just as, you know, he's right there with them, and
I agree.
And yeah, that's such a great film. I didn't even think to put that in there. That's a great pick.
Cody stole my words. I literally was going to say this has not only a great screenplay, but no one talks about the acting as much as they should. So thanks, Cody.
Yeah.
That's all I had.
I will continually steal things from you for the rest
this
of the show.
This is going to be very boring now. Come on, guys. Stop thinking alike.
I know. We're like so on the same page right now.
Oh, man. For the risk of this becoming really boring, let's continue to change it up. So let's get right to number 2, and hopefully you guys don't have the same pick at number 2.
Yeah,
Cody, what do you have at number 2, man?
So, Brennan, I actually did what you said you wouldn't do, and I have Tommy DeVito as my number 2.
You got to do it. I understand.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and actually for a different reason, though, because Goodfellas did not resonate with me in the way it did other people. I think it's good, but it's you know, it's definitely not my favorite Scorsese movie.
Oh, wow.
But, you know, yeah, and you know, I think the thing I sort of alluded to earlier when we were talking about Black Mass is I really like the characters who are unhinged and you don't know what they're going to do next. And I think Pesci's character in here is maybe the best example of that really hothead guy who, you know, can just turn on a dime. And I just love that quality about that character. And it makes for such a, you know, when you have a character like that, it makes for such tension every single time they're on screen, because you literally just don't know what's going to happen next, because anything could happen. And I think that character is probably the best example of that I can think of, that particular quality in a character.
He could potentially turn on his own people. In fact, you know, what's interesting is that the character that he brought on screen was so iconic at the time that they essentially recycled the same character in Scorsese's Casino that came out, I think 5 years later, because he's almost essentially playing the same character if you really think about it. But it was so iconic for its time, and how we kind of set up the segment to go into this, you know, the whole funny how. Am I like a clown? Do I amuse you? Do I make you laugh? I mean, people will be talking about that for years. That'll never be forgotten. It's so wonderful, and a wonderful performance by Joe Pesci.
And one of my biggest criticisms of Black Mass is when they reference that so blatantly and obvious, which I won't reveal, I guess, necessarily because I don't want to spoil it. But that, to me, didn't add anything narratively to Black Mass, and it was just ripping that scene specifically. So, because you're right, it is a very iconic scene, and he's terrific in it. Sure. So, you know, I could see why people would want to reference it. I think Black Mass went a little too far with it, though.
It was too obvious. I agree.
Yeah.
Anyway, JD, what do you have at number 2?
I don't need to spend a lot of time here. I thought about leaving these guys off as well because I think this is obvious. At least it is for me. But I love these characters so much, I have to include them. And maybe perhaps because of that, this will have to end up in my penalty box now. But I'm going with Jules and Vincent from Pulp Fiction.
I knew it. I should have told you. Don't do it. Don't do it.
I have to, man. Like, we were talking about In Bruges, about the acting and the writing of that. I mean, that just is the exact same thing here. The writing and the dialogue is fantastic, but the performances are wonderful as well and iconic for a lot of the same reasons we were talking about before. So, yeah, I mean, there's nothing really else I can really say that hasn't been said. These guys just make me laugh. I love it. It's brilliant. It's in my top 5 of all time, and the scenes with Jules and Vincent are a big reason because of that. And I can't get enough. I just can't get enough, so they make my number 2.
I don't think we need to say any more about that, because if anyone out there listening doesn't know what we're talking about, or even worse, doesn't agree with us, then there's no hope for humanity for you. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's a great pick.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about those characters on the show before, so... If you didn't get enough here, go listen to our back catalog. I promise you'll hear a lot more of them.
Yeah, but it's a great pick, man, and I think these guys are just so great. Just listening to them talk, about nothing that has to do with the story. That's where Tarantino is magical, and it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
The dialogue about the foot massages, which has nothing to do with anything, is just hilarious. It's so good.
Gave him a foot massage. Fell full stories.
I love it.
Love it. But anyway, continuing on from my number 2. I won't spend too much time on this, because this may be a film that I don't know if a lot of you folks, even listening, or you guys here probably have seen. But for a lot of the same reasons why I picked Ray and Ken as my number 3 pick, because I mentioned quote unquote gangsters or criminals that actually represent having a conscience, is kind of the same reasons why I'm picking this as my number 2. But it's a well-known actor that's very known for playing gangsters in movies, and that's Robert De Niro. But I'm picking his role as David Aronson, nicknamed Noodles, from the movie Once Upon a Time in America. And this is obviously directed by Sergio Leone, who gave us, the classic spaghetti westerns like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Once Upon a Time in the West, the other 2 films with Clint Eastwood from the unofficial Dollars trilogy. But he tackled an American crime epic here, a film that is nearly 4 hours long, and results in what might be my favorite quote-unquote mobster movie. I think the reason why I like Robert De Niro in this film is because his performance is so subtle. And JD, you were talking about subtlety in a film like Black Mass, and that is, the filmmaking in this movie isn't very subtle, but the performances here are very subtle. Yet somehow, Robert De Niro is able to not only give a subtle performance, but portray a character that is very, very despicable. And yet somehow, you still feel some pity for this guy. And the movie does a very good job dealing with past regret and trying to find forgiveness for your actions, and how that kind of coincides with friendship and brotherhood. I always found kind of interesting, and I think his performance, the subtle performance specifically, is really what sells it here and creates a very heartbreaking character that you probably shouldn't like. He's a despicable guy, yet you still do, and that's why I got to pick it as my number 2. And before I go any further, I don't know if you guys have seen this film, and I think that'll really kind of trigger some of the discussion. If not, I don't know how much we can talk about, but Robert De Niro in this film would be my number 2.
Yeah, it's actually a blind spot for me. This is one I got to catch up on.
If you've got 4 hours, I'd say.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either.
But yeah, I like I said, if you've got 4 hours of time, I think the movie exactly is like 3 hours and 49 minutes, and it's a chore to watch. It really is. And I couldn't do it in one sitting, but James Woods is in it. Joe Pesci's even in it. And
sure.
It's a very interesting list. It was almost kind of, you could think of it as like a precursor to what Martin Scorsese did with Goodfellas and even so on after that. But I love this film. I think it's very poetic, very beautiful in its own way, and it tells a really interesting and sometimes ambiguous story. I think Sergio Leone was one of the most underrated directors of the time. I love this guy's work, and I love this film.
Yeah, I do like Sergio Leone quite a bit, so this is just one of his that I need to catch up on. So,
yeah, I'd recommend it. But with that note, let's continue on to the nitty-gritty. So, Cody, what do you have at your number 1?
So for number 1, I have Jack Nicholson as Frank Costello in The Departed.
Gnawing, eating f***ing rat. And it brings up questions. See, Bill, like, you're the new guy.
girlfriend. Why don't you stay in the bar? That night I got your numbers. Social security numbers.
Yeah.
Everybody's fucking numbers.
Is there something that you just want to go ahead and ask me? Because I'll give you the fucking answer, all right? Frank, look at me. Look at me. I'm not the fucking rat, okay? I'm not the fucking rat.
Start with you agree there is a rat.
You said there is one, all right? I base most of what I do on the idea that you're pretty fucking good at what you do.
The Departed is in my top 5 of all time. For whatever reason, I absolutely love the film. And Nicholson is just so great in it. And, again, a very unsettling character, but also, a very funny character at times. And just the way he delivers really black humor in the film. And just a scary character, another example of a scary character. And I guess, and maybe it's so high on my list because The Departed is one of my favorite films, but for whatever reason, I'm so attached to that film and especially Nicholson's performance. And it was especially great to see from Nicholson, kind of going back into a role like that after seeing some stuff like, he did Anger Management and Something's Got to Give right before that. There was that 3-year gap, yeah. But it's just a great role. And again, I think it's kind of like a close to my heart pick because I love the film so much, but I still really like that performance.
So Cody, I could definitely see where you're coming from with The Departed being kind of a personal pick for you because it kind of is for me. In fact, JD, when we talked about films that kind of quote unquote had a personal effect on us, I think I included this film because The Departed was a film that really kind of changed the way I judge and the way I perceive movies, because after seeing this, I really started looking at movies in a different way. I started paying attention to how stories unfold, the acting, how what it means to direct a film, what's going on behind the camera. A lot of these aspects in the way I look at films nowadays, I have to tribute to The Departed. Another fun fact with this film is Frank Costello is actually very much inspired by Whitey Bulger. What he's doing in this film is meant to be kind of a representation of what Whitey Bulger was, and it's not a direct reference. A lot of the similarities are more for, the fact when we find out he was an informant with the FBI, it takes place in Southie Boston, all those things like that are definitely very uncanny resemblances, but some of his behavioral aspects are, I guess, definitely tributing to that as well. Cody, you're absolutely right. What Jack Nicholson does here, it's such an underappreciated performance. He's very scary and he's very funny, and he somehow gets that balance just right. And Nicholson is very good at doing that, and I think he does it even better here than he may have done in some other instances in the past. And for all those reasons, I'm just going to jump ahead of you, JD. This was also my number 1, Frank Costello from The Departed. And maybe like for the same reasons as you, Cody, very nostalgic to this film because it kind of changed my perception on how I judge film. But what Jack Nicholson is doing here is just, it's remarkable. I've never seen him be able to blend that kind of dark humor and such fear and fright and all the stuff that you should not appreciate out of this guy, and somehow he makes the balance work in spades. I gotta give him credit. Have to give him credit there.
Yeah, I think the scene that sticks out to me is the scene with the hand. Is kind of the thing that sticks out the most to me. Such an amazing scene.
Yeah, and then he simply just takes that guy's ring off, and I think he puts it on his own hand. Yeah. It's like he's just casually, handling, no pun intended, this disfigured hand. It's like it's no big deal. It's like, wow, just wow, no words.
Yeah. And you're right, and I didn't get into it as much as you did, but I'm going to, because that was it was one of the first films that really meant a lot to me in terms of like, wow, I'm watching something totally different here, and just I know it's I'm not going to spoil the twist that happened in a movie that's almost 10 years old, but the big shocking moment of that film, I just remember my jaw literally dropping when it happened, because it's such a dispassionate moment, and it just like happens, and it's not even the way that moment unfolds is one of my favorite scenes in a movie ever. It's just I love the execution of that scene so much.
Mm-hmm. In fact, I remember when I saw it in the theater, audience members screamed like they're about to die. It was magical.
I will say I've been quietly listening to you guys talk about this film, and I will agree with you guys. This is absolutely a wonderful film. I completely agree about Jack Nicholson's performance. It's really terrific. In fact, I like all the acting in this movie is quite good. And when I was talking about how much I loved the subtlety of Black Mass, this is the movie I kept going to in terms of the exact opposite of what Black Mass was doing, but telling pretty much the same story with a lot of the same characters, because you were talking about how this is inspired off of Whitey Bulger, and I knew that, obviously, but this is a lot more violent. It's more energetic. It's got a lot more vulgar language. I mean, this is a Scorsese movie, so you can certainly expect that, which is fine. I think what Scorsese's doing here is absolutely wonderful, but this is a perfect example of what I loved about what Black Mass was doing, is because you see something like this movie, and we've seen a lot of other gangster films like this, and then you see something like Black Mass, which is doing something very different. It's more quiet. It's more about its subtle approach and its filmmaking and its acting, and yet it's still telling a similar story. And for me, that was refreshing for the genre. So I'm glad you guys brought this up, because I didn't want to specifically, point out The Departed as, hey, this is what I was thinking about, but I love this movie for all the reasons you're talking about, but it's also a great reason for why I liked Black Mass too, because it's doing pretty much everything on the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think The Departed, what it's doing is absolutely it's warranted. I think the way it tells its story is absolutely warranted.
Great,
but
sure.
I think being appreciative of Black Mass as you are, I think only making the comparison to Departed for me is because the stories themselves are very similar, because they're both inspired by the same types of events and they take place in the same setting. I think The Departed actually set that kind of precedent that you're talking about. I think after Departed came out, there were a few other crime dramas that kept coming out within that gritty and kinetic fashion that kept trying to mimic what The Departed did very well, and I think maybe kind of got a bit repetitive in that regard, which makes a movie like Black Mass feel more refreshing because of what The Departed started.
Yeah, sure.
I don't think it was necessarily The Departed that is the direct comparison, because what The Departed is doing, unlike what came after it, is very well warranted. I think the kinetic energy and the violence and everything just really help. I think it helps set this film apart, even though so many came and kind of quote unquote copied it, if that makes any sense.
And I completely agree with all those reasons. I'm not saying that The Departed was copying any sort of style or anything either.
Oh, no.
But you're right when you're saying that since this movie has come out, we've gotten so many of these that for me, Black Mass, even doing something like A Prophet did, because A Prophet was pretty slow and methodical as well, but we just don't see that as much since this movie came out. And given that it was telling almost the same story, that I liked that Black Mass was the opposite, because if it had kinetic energy and it had more vulgar language and violence, all Black Mass would be compared to is this movie.
Absolutely. Yeah. But anyway, I think we can beat the dead horse on this film till we die, and I don't want to do that. But anyway, JD, what do you have as your number one?
Before I get into it, last thing I want to say on that, and I just want to make this clear, is I love The Departed too. I love that movie. I was just bringing up the points you guys were bringing up as a comparison point to why I liked Black Mass. That's all I was saying with it. I love The Departed for all the reasons you've talked about. So just wanted to make that clear.
Don't worry, you're not lying. We believe you.
For my number one, I'm going all the way back to 1967. Speaking of movies that changed the game, this is definitely one that did that as well. And for my number one, I'm talking about Clyde Barrow from Bonnie and Clyde.
You're born somewhere around East Texas, right?
Yeah.
You come from a big old family?
Yeah.
You went to school, of course, but you didn't take to it much because you was a lot smarter than everybody else, so you just up and quit one day. Now, when you was 17, there was a guy who worked in a
Cement plant.
Right, cement plant. And you liked him because he thought you were just as nice as you could be. And you almost married that guy. But then you thought, no, you didn't think you would. So then you got your job in a cafe. And now you wake up every morning, you hate it. You just hate it. You get on down there and you put on your white uniform.
Pink. It's pink.
Uh-huh. And them truck drivers come in there to eat your greasy burgers and they kid you and you kid them back. But they're stupid and dumb boys with the big old tattoos on them and you don't like it. And they ask you for dates and sometimes you go, but you mostly don't because all they're ever trying to do is get in your pants whether you want them to or not. So you go on home and you sit in your room and you think, now when and how am I ever going to get away from this?
Which is something that I got to rewatch this last week, and I made a great choice by doing that. So I love it when you can watch a movie and it makes your week better. So I really love the Clyde Barrow character for a lot of the reasons that I was actually kind of talking about with Black Mass, going back to that film, I guess. And this is going to sound a little bit like a contradiction, but that's why during our Black Mass review, I wanted to say in time, all those feelings and all that jarring that was happening in that movie could fade away, because in a movie like Bonnie and Clyde, the Clyde character also has moments of humanity. There's a lot about this character that is actually pretty endearing, which you have to give a lot of credit to Warren Beatty for. His performance was really, really terrific. And he does have a sense of charisma. This is a character that isn't necessarily wanting to be violent, but he can be when he needs to be. He does have more humanistic qualities to him than you would think for a bank robber, and you certainly see that in the character, and I think that's what draws me to him, because as much as we see him in a scene where he shoots a guy in the face as he is escaping from this bank heist, there's another scene where they go to rob a bank, and he asks the guy, is that your money or the bank's? And the guy says, it's my money. And he says, okay, you can keep it. And you have instant sympathy for this guy. There is humanity in this guy. He's not necessarily wanting to harm people. If anything, he has it out for the banks and for society and regulation. There's another great scene where they're at this abandoned house, and the family of this house pretty much just wants to stop by and say their final goodbyes to this house. And Clyde gives the gun to the father of this family, and he just lets him shoot bullets into the house because it's now the banks, and so they're destroying it on purpose. And I love that about this character. I love that he has so many great humanistic qualities that bring sympathy to him, that makes you want to like him, but then he has these other qualities to him that makes you almost loathe the character at the same time. He's such a complex and complicated character that I absolutely love. And for this genre, I think he just stands out for me because of that. And I was so glad I got a chance to rewatch it this last week. Like I said, I love it. So, I mean, there's a lot more going on in this movie for sure. But when we're talking gangsters, I certainly wanted to make Clyde stand out because I think he is absolutely wonderful.
I am very disappointed in myself right now. And the reason why is because I really wish that our conversation, JD, that happened a couple days ago, I wish I got that patented, because you quoted me verbatim what I texted you about Clyde Barrow, about how that bank scene is one of my favorite scenes in any kind of crime movie, is how he lets the innocent customer there keep his own money, which showcases not only Clyde's motivation as a criminal, but it also gives you instant sympathy for him. And sometimes that sympathy is also ripped out of you. Sometimes you also hate this guy, and then sometimes you'll come back to really liking this guy as a person. You keep going back and forth like that. And while some people may find that frustrating, I think that makes him more human. And that's why this character is so refreshing here. And the only other thing I want to mention before we toss at any other thoughts you may have is we're talking about Clyde Barrow specifically, but a lot of what makes this character so good wouldn't work if it wasn't for how great Faye Dunaway also is in this film.
I agree.
Because
I agree.
I think in many ways you can almost say that you've got to put Bonnie here within this almost as a tie with Clyde, because I think the way that they complement each other is the reason why one can sometimes shine over the other. It's you can almost think of Bonnie and Clyde together as one singularity.
No, I was going to say, which is really fair. That's why I put Jules and Vincent together as well. And why I can certainly buy into that argument, because there's lots of layers going on with Bonnie where she's struggling with what her new identity is at this point. Like there's moments where she wants to go home, but she wants to be with Clyde, and she likes being this outlaw at the same time. And that conflict really, really goes in parallel with the Clyde character. And you're right. They bounce off each other so perfectly. It's great.
Yeah. I completely agree, but I think the reasons for you picking Clyde, though, are absolutely... I understand them perfectly, because I think you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I'll say is you stole my pun for the Master when Adam was on the show, so it only makes up for...
I did. I forgot about that. Okay, we're even. We're even.
So, fair enough.
All right. But anyway, before we move on, did you guys have any honorable mentions that you want to mention quickly? We'll toss it to you first, Cody.
Well, now that JD let Pulp Fiction in there, I'm going to put that definitely on my list. I wasn't even thinking that's such a great pick and outside the box, and really the In Bruges one is too. So I'm going to have those be my honorable mentions, because those are two of my favorite, crime related films that I just for whatever reason didn't connect with me when I was making this list. So really great picks from both of you that I would definitely put on my mentions.
Oh, thanks, appreciate that, and I definitely agree. How about you, JD?
There are so many to choose from that I honestly didn't have a lot of honorable mentions, because there's so many you could pick here. Obviously, we threw out The Godfather, Goodfellas, The Departed you guys were talking about. I will say the one character that was close to making my list was Christopher Walken's character from True Romance. Was pretty close to being on here as well. So I felt like his character is a little limited compared to the other ones on my list, which is why I kind of left him off, but I heavily considered him given my criteria. So I just wanted to mention that real quick.
That's a pretty good pick as well. I could definitely see your point though. And as far as honorable mentions for me, I'm kind of in the same boat, that I think everyone we've talked about that didn't make my personal list would probably be an honorable mention for me, especially either the ones within the Goodfellas or the Godfather regime, even Pulp Fiction. But the only one I want to throw out there that I think was close, it's in a movie that I am personally not a huge fan of. It's a Scorsese movie, but I think that in this movie, Bill the Butcher, played by Daniel Day-Lewis from Gangs of New York, is really an awesome character. I'm not a huge fan of this film, though. I think it's an okay film overall, but I think Daniel Day-Lewis, as great as he is in everything that he's in, is also excellent in this film. And this guy scares the living crap out of me sometimes. So, but that's the only other one that I have to mention as far as honorable mentions for me that I think is worth noting, because it's a good character.
All right, well, let us know how your picks stack up against ours. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com, leave a comment on Facebook or Twitter, or on our website at InSessionFilm.com.
All right, before we move on, let's talk about this week's poll.
It's real bad, okay? I don't like those numbers at all.
Just one poll? Those things aren't scientific.
Yes, they are. All this is science. This is math.
All right, so for this week's poll, with Black Mass coming out as a quote-unquote resurgence for Johnny Depp, if you will, we decided to talk about what is your favorite performance by Johnny Depp. And the options that we threw out there were Edward Scissorhands, What's Eating Gilbert Grape, Ed Wood, Donnie Brasco, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Blow, Finding Neverland, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, or we left a write-in option for you there if you had something else that you wanted to talk about. Normally, I'd probably toss it to you guys first to kind of get your opinions on what you think, but since this is a perfect segue into our third segment, I'm just going to go straight to the results and we'll kind of banter off of that.
Sure.
But winning this poll at 36.7% was not really that surprising to me, and that was Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl. Obviously, his very iconic portrayal of Keith Richards. No, I'm sorry, I mean Jack Sparrow.
It's the same.
It is. We know he was inspired by that. In fact, Keith Richards makes a cameo in the third film, which I thought was I thought was kind of clever as Jack Sparrow's father. But you know, this is a performance that did garner Johnny Depp an Oscar nomination, and I could definitely see why. There's definitely a lot of bravery and humor here, which I thought was very interesting. Coming in at second place at 19.6% was his performance in Edward Scissorhands, one of his I think his first outing with Tim Burton. the one starting of many that we would definitely get to talk about, maybe in maybe it's not so much the best performances out of him, but we'll talk about that later. And coming in at third place at 16.3% was his performance in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, a movie I will never forget after watching that. What a wild trip that movie is.
It is a wild trip, but I do think he's really good in it, so I was glad to see that get some votes. I'm also not surprised about Pirates of the Caribbean, and as much as it's a cliche now to think about that performance, that first film was really good, and he was really good in it, so I can see why people are tired of it, but I can see why people would vote for it too, so...
I would agree. Yeah, I could see why people would vote for it. I mean, me personally, I'm not a fan of really any of the Pirates films. So that's just me. It's just not quite my thing. I think from a storytelling angle that they are so flawed that I'm never engaged with them. But Johnny Depp in those films he looks just like Johnny Depp, but somehow he's able to transform, and it's in those moments where he can get so engulfed in the oddities and the makeup or wherever he wants to do, but it feels like it's all with a purpose. And that's an example of when I think his over extravaganza with what he does, makeup wise or all that stuff physically makes sense. And I think it makes sense for those films. I like what he does as Jack Sparrow. I think that's a good thing in those films. And I think it's very warranted.
Me too. And while I would argue the second and third films definitely aren't as good as the first, and while it's not my favorite performance, it would get my second vote. Like it would be my second favorite, I think. I do think it's that good, and I think his nomination was definitely deserved. I think he does transform, and he is doing a lot in that movie. So he certainly makes it work where the narrative certainly is flawed for sure. And just real quick, we did get a couple of write-ins. Someone wrote in for Alice in Wonderland. I'm glad it's your thing. Definitely wasn't mine. Don't laugh at people. And
I'm sorry. Whoever wrote that, I'm sure you had a good reason for it. I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend you.
Yeah, it's not my thing, but I can understand. And we also had a write-in for Sleepy Hollow, and they went on to say really underrated performance. So
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks everyone that voted on the poll. We really, really do appreciate it. And on that note, we got more to talk about from Johnny Depp and more performances in a new segment we are calling Best and Worst. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Hey guys, just want to pause for a quick second to say a huge thank you to those that are supporting the show. And if you want to help support us, there's just a couple ways that you can help us out, and we would really appreciate it because we can't do it without you guys. So one, go check out our bonus content on our website for just a small donation of 99 cents. We actually do put them up there for free to listen to, but we do encourage and appreciate that small donation. And coming up pretty soon, we will have another edition of Nerdin' Out with DJ Valentine coming soon, so make sure you stay on the lookout for that. Another way to help us out is patreon.com. As you heard up at the top of the show, it's a really great resource where you can sign up to donate per show, and you're going to get a bunch of free gifts in the process. You can not only get a t-shirt or a prize package, but if you sign up on the first level, we'll even review a film that you want us to review on the show. A lot of cool stuff there. Patreon.com/InSession Film. You'll see all the levels there. Go sign up, and we really do appreciate it. And of course, you can just donate via PayPal directly to the show. Go to InSessionFilm.com/donate. You'll see the PayPal button right there. and you can donate directly via that button.
And on the note of getting some stuff, if you want to get some stuff that's specifically related to InSession Film, there's a way you can do that by going to the InSession Film store, which you can find at InSessionFilm.com/store. And over here, we've got a lot of cool items such as a t-shirt, a mug, an iPhone case, with our logo slapped right on it. It's really cool, really great way for you to not only support us, but help market us as well. And to help make things even easier for you, we can even get something customized for you. Perhaps you have a different item that you'd like to see our logo slapped on. Just let us know. We can work on getting something customized for you to make it better for you, and we'd appreciate some support there. Also, as many of you know, we are sponsored by Audible.com, and with Audible, you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial by going to audibletrial.com/InSessionFilm. And here you can get over 150,000 titles for you to choose from for whatever your smart device is, whether it be your iPhone, Kindle, Android, or your MP3 player. You may want to read up on the latest Star Wars or Marvel collateral that's currently out there leading up to Star Wars The Force Awakens. A lot of cool stuff there. But at the same time, great way to be supporting our show as well as also reading up on the latest geekdom out there. Really great best of both worlds scenario there that I think is a great way to help support us as well, and we'd appreciate that as well.
Absolutely. And even just a subscription on iTunes or a like on Facebook or a follow on Twitter, it all goes a really, really long way. And we really do appreciate everyone's support.
Hi, this is Greg.
This is Chuck.
And this is Dan. And we are Talking in Circles. Because the world needs another podcast, we are here as Geekcast Radio's newest edition.
And as the title says, each week we get lost in conversation about a wide range of topics, including movies, comics, games, art, TV, and even occasionally sports.
We play games and discuss pivotal topics like who would win in a fight, the Kool-Aid Man or Tony the Tiger, and examine the hot-button issues of the world of geekdom.
We keep things fresh by taking timeless topics in new directions. We are simply three friends having a fun time talking about life's most fascinating foibles.
Stay connected with us every Tuesday on iTunes or at geekcastradio.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast, now syndicated on geekcastradio.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 135. And now we're going to be starting a new segment we call Best and Worst.
When you marooned me on that godforsaken spit of land, you forgot one very important thing, mate. I'm Captain Jack Sparrow.
All right, guys, this is pretty simple. All we're going to be doing is talking about Johnny Depp's performances and giving a worst and a best performance. Let's start with you, Cody, and let's, I guess, go with his best performances. What would you say is Johnny Depp's best performance, Cody?
So the reason I was so quiet during your Jack Sparrow conversation was because I didn't want to spoil me saying that Jack Sparrow is my number one pick. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's his, if we're speaking just from a purely acting perspective, his best, objective performance, but it's definitely the one that that sort of it's the best example of him getting completely absorbed by a character, and it's the best example of the whole wacky Johnny Depp stuff that followed afterwards. And it's I think it's what he's trying to do in his heart every time he dons the makeup and just can't quite reach it. But it's such a funny performance, and he just electrifies the screen every time he's on, and you always want more of that character. And it's just such it's so fun and funny and charismatic, and I think that again it's an iconic role, really. And I mean, they're still making those films even after all of these years, and he's spun off and so I would say that's my number one pick, because I think it shows what he's capable of when he wants to be kind of different and weird.
And the thing that I like about it too, and obviously I just talked about how much I like it, I love how committed he is to it. I think that's one of my favorite things, and part of the reason why he disappears is he loves playing this character, and he certainly gets into it, and not just in film but out of film. We've seen him be this character on stage at other things. He'll go to hospitals to visit children and stuff. People have liked it. he's embraced it. It's kind of just part of who he is. And I think that's a big reason why it works, is just how committed he is to it.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with that. And but you know what? It's tempting to put it as his worst because it spawns so many bad performances.
Yes.
You know.
Touche. Good point.
No wonder we call it best and worst, because they're the same thing.
Exactly.
Very good stuff. All right, Brendan, let's kick it to you. What would you say is his best performance?
So, what I pick for his best is actually one of his outings with Tim Burton, and I'm going with the 1994 film Ed Wood. And Ed Wood is actually one of my favorite Tim Burton films, but I think what Johnny Depp does here is... the reason why I think he's so good here is because he makes you sympathize so much with a character that... or not a character, a real-life person that made arguably the worst films of all time, that it made me actually kind of appreciate that those films were so bad and actually kind of respect that those films were so bad, that there was so much passion that went into those films. I love what Johnny Depp brings to this role. I love his energy. I love his passion. I love how overexcited he gets about certain things and how he makes assumptions about how the audience is going to react to certain things. Like when there's certain flaws and mistakes that happen on set, he simply goes, no one's going to notice anything like that, and shows how wrong he actually was.
Yeah, sure.
But I think his energy and his passion here not only help create such a sympathetic real-life figure, or at least a representation of this real-life figure, but somehow, me personally, he made me want to go back and watch a film like Plan 9 from Outer Space with such an open mind, knowing the kind of person that made it. And when I did rewatch that film, I didn't hate it as much. I mean, it's still a bad film, and I still don't like it, but I recognize that how well that this film represents the passion of art and the love of art, whatever that art may be. And I think Johnny Depp is really the biggest reason why it works so well, and he does such a good job making that theme feel so prevalent and so poignant, and that's really the biggest reason why I got to give him credit here, mostly because he made me better appreciate such a terrible film like Plan 9 from Outer Space. I got to go with Ed Wood. I think it's a great performance. Phenomenal.
Well, this will be easy for me to bounce off of, and going into the week, I would have said that this probably would have been top 5, but not my number 1. But thinking about it more and looking back at some of his filmography, I'm actually in your camp with this, Brendan. I actually have Ed Wood as at least my favorite, but I would say it's definitely one of his best because he really does transform into this character, and there's certainly a couple different sides to this character, but he has this demeanor that he carries throughout the film, this voice. Like, Depp just really transforms into this character, and he brings passion to it, like you were saying, and it certainly makes those themes of the movie resonate, and it also makes it really fun to watch at the same time. So this is one I really want to go back and rewatch. I haven't seen it in quite a few years now, but thinking about it, this was one that just came to my mind of, and especially hearing other people talk about it and some research, I was like, this actually is a really great performance, and one that I really liked. I'd say Fear and Loathing would have been my number 1 coming into the week, but when I was thinking about it and doing my research, I was like, this is the one that really stands out to me for all those reasons you were talking about as well. It's really good, and he really transforms into this, even more so than some of his other work, where he obviously is disappearing within makeup, but character-wise, this is maybe arguably the one he disappears the most, and I think he's really good at it. So I completely agree.
Yeah, and we talk about something like what he does with Captain Jack Sparrow, that he transforms himself with such passion for a role like that. Whereas you could say the exact same thing here, but I feel like it's even more passionate because it's helping to support a film thematically as well, and not just what it's trying to give you physically from from a standpoint of just pure entertainment, like maybe something like a Pirates film will do. And no disrespect to what those films are doing, because it's those are what those films are just trying to do. They're simple, just as simple as that. But there's a lot more going on to that transformation in a role like this with Ed Wood that I think is very difficult to do. I think it's a very underappreciated performance as well, because in fact I think Martin Landau was the only one that walked away with not only an Oscar nomination but an Oscar win for this film. You didn't see anything come in the way of Johnny Depp or Sarah Jessica Parker or anyone like that, and I think it's very underappreciated.
Yeah, I completely agree. And speaking of thematically, I guess just to stick with the themes of this show, it's also what makes me appreciate Black Mass as well, because it reminds us that Johnny Depp can transform into roles if he takes himself seriously, which I thought he did in Black Mass, and it worked pretty well. And Ed Wood is another great example of it, as much as people want to give him crap, and a lot of it is well-deserved. We'll get to that here in a second. But this is a role that reminds us that he is really, really good, and he does have a lot of raw talent, and I completely agree. This is maybe a little bit underappreciated. I think it's wonderful for a lot of reasons. So, all right, well, let's flip the coin, and let's talk about his worst performances. There's a lot of good ones here to pick from, fellas, so I hope you're ready. Cody, we'll start with you. What do you think is his worst performance?
You know, I actually thought about this one way more than I did best performance. And I just agonized over it, because part of me wanted to say Mordecai, because that movie was so awful. But when I was thinking about it, I was like, I almost get that, because he had to know how terrible that movie was, and he was probably working for the paycheck and just kind of put his head down and did it. Mm-hmm. The thing that's inexcusable to me, and definitely easily, I think the worst he's done, is his very minor role in Tusk.
Oh wow!
Okay.
That scene that happens at the cabin with him and Michael Parks is the most excruciating thing I've seen in the past year or two in movies. I just wanted to, very rarely do I want to get up and leave a theater when I'm watching something. And during that entire scene and his entire screen time, I wanted to just leave. And I don't care where I went. I just wanted to get out of the theater. and it's such a dumb play off of Inspector Clouseau. And it's just, his accent is terrible, and his dumb fake nose, and just he should have known better. He knew what he was getting into with that, and I feel like he purposely made it weird, and it was just so awful.
Well, to be fair, a lot of that movie is really weird and bizarre. I'd have to go back and rewatch it, but what I can remember is that scene actually, I think, brought some levity to it for me, because everything happening within the main narrative was so outlandish and weird and crazy that when he popped up, it was like, oh look, here's strange, weird, bizarre Johnny Depp, and it actually, I think, brought a little bit of light humor that I actually appreciated about that movie, where the rest of it was just so crazy I could hardly handle it. But that's a really interesting choice, though.
Yeah, it's so. I don't know. I'm not sure what it was, and I think maybe the reason that you said that it was kind of a change was actually because I hated Tusk through and through, but the idea that it was so out there, it felt like it was part of a different movie the worst way.
Yeah, for me, I would say it worked for me in terms of balancing or counterbalancing what was happening, but I can certainly see your point, because it absolutely is a different movie. So it's a criticism for me regardless. I guess it just kind of helped counterbalance all the more arduous things happening in the movie, I'll say, I guess. But anyway, let's move on. Brendan, what would you say is his worst performance?
For me, it's a no-brainer. It's his performance as Willy Wonka in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Without bleep me out here, without a doubt. I mean, this is one of the worst performances I think I have personally seen out of anyone. And I think giving this a Razzie is almost not even bad enough for it. And I think the reason why it's so bad for me, and this is not comparing to what Wilder did in the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I mean, that's beside the point, because that works for that film. But this story and Ron Dahl's original story really works if you feel a sense of, I guess, drama that forms between Wonka and Charlie Bucket himself. There's supposed to be kind of there's supposed to be a relationship that kind of works between them that I think kind of makes a sense of purpose for the Charlie character and how the story concludes with him. But The movie doesn't work if I find Willy Wonka to be one of the most unintentionally creepy characters I think I've ever seen in a movie. This guy scared the living out of me. Everything he does is so creepy, and I don't think it's intentional. I think it's meant to be kind of cutesy and, kind of in the vein of a family-friendly film. And it is not for me. It's so bizarre to the point that it actually scares me. I think his representation of Willy Wonka is one of the most frightening things I think I've seen in any film. And this is not even a horror film. This is a film for kids. It's a PG-rated film. It's a family film. It is so creepy. And it makes the film just not work for me, which is kind of unfortunate because I think I kind of like what Tim Burton was doing up until we actually get introduced to Johnny Depp as Willy Wonka. Everything with Charlie and Freddie Highmore and his family and everything like that, I really like it. I think it's very good. And then we meet Willy Wonka, and I just have to turn the movie off. What Johnny Depp is doing here, it's a big middle finger to what I think this film is trying to do. It really is. And like I said, it's no comparison to what Wilder was doing in the previous film. I can get that aside. But what Johnny Depp is doing, I think, completely ruins anything that this film was trying to go for emotionally, maybe thematically, anything like that. It ruins it. Absolutely ruins it. And it's disrespectful. I hate it.
Full disclosure, I haven't seen this version of it.
Don't.
I haven't seen it in a long time.
Don't. JD, you're afraid of clowns? Yeah. You'll have a new fear after seeing this film.
Just looking at the poster is creepy enough, honestly, even without even seeing it. But the big reason I skipped it, not because it was Tim Burton or that it was Johnny Depp being creepy and weird, as much as the trailers just looked god-awful. And so I didn't really care to see it at all. And now you're telling me that he's creepy and weird on top of it? Yeah, I'll pass. That's okay.
And it's unfortunate because the movie itself, what's going on, maybe if I were to judge it objectively, it's not that bad. I mean, and there's a lot of good things going on. In fact, the reviews for it are pretty good. It has a 72% on Metacritic. It's got a lot of good positive. It's got some positive buzz behind it, but Johnny Depp, screw you. What you did here is just unforgivable. I can't stand it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. Again, he was very off-putting in the trailer, so I haven't seen it, but I don't necessarily foresee myself loving this movie, or liking the performance. So,
yeah.
Well, moving on to my worst performance, I'm kind of in your camp, though, Brennan, in terms of this one rose to the top for me pretty easily, and it's pretty awful for a lot of reasons, but I'm going with Johnny Depp as Tonto in The Lone Ranger that came out a few years ago. Like, it's not just that it's a bad performance. It's obviously weird, Johnny Depp and makeup again, but it's also kind of offensive because he's playing a Native American character. And not only is Johnny Depp not Native American, he's not doing anything that fits the lore of Native American culture or anything like that. He's just being bizarre. It is a little offensive. And the whole time he's not taking himself serious. He's just so outside of his limits. He's goofy and just silly, and you can't take anything he says seriously. I mean, just the end credits of this movie alone is really everything that you need to know about the psyche of this character, because he's just walking away into a wasteland like a goddamn maniac. And that is that character throughout the entire movie. I will say, my favorite part about this whole movie, and I still argue this to this day, the last 20 minutes is some of my favorite filmmaking of 2013. The last 20 minutes is a ton of fun. And a big reason why it works is because Johnny Depp's character isn't saying anything.
He's silent.
He's silent. It is like watching Charlie Chaplin movies from the 1920s and 30s. I mean, that's what it's like. And for me, I think that's why it works. It's because it's embracing its goofiness. It's embracing the fun that these characters can have. And there's just not a lot of dialogue. And the little dialogue that's there makes sense. And for me, that's why the ending of that movie is just a blast, and it works. But everything up until that point, every time Johnny Depp talks, it's just ridiculous and an absurdity. But I will say, and this will be the last thing I'll say, going back to some of the stuff I was saying in Black Mass, there are a few moments, just a few moments in this movie where Johnny Depp takes himself seriously, and when he does, he's really good. And it really stands out for me because everything else is so in this film. The two moments he does take himself serious, holy crap, it's like, oh my God, Johnny Depp can actually act. Why doesn't he do that more throughout this movie? Of course he doesn't, but it's why it's also frustrating. It's such an awful performance, and the movie is awful because of it.
So I have only seen the last 20 minutes out of your recommendation because I think it was at your apartment and it was playing on HBO or something.
Yeah, sure.
And we caught it right to the last 20 minutes and say, okay. And you were like, okay, Brennan,
just watch this.
You want to watch a really good short film right now?
Yeah.
Here's the last 20 minutes of The Lone Ranger. And you're right. Johnny Depp doesn't bother me in that moment because he didn't say a damn thing. And in fact, I don't even know how he sounds in the movie because I haven't seen the movie. All I know is him swinging around like he's Mad Max or something like that. That's all I know from him. But or even better yet, what he's like, kind of channeling the Charlie Chaplin or the Buster Keaton mannerisms.
That's exactly what he's doing. Yes.
Yeah, which maybe that's how the whole movie should have been. I think Gore Verbinski probably had a better opportunity with just making an 80-minute film that kind of mirrored something like that. I think it could have been very rewarding.
I think so too, man, because that's what's so great about that last 20 minutes. It really does work as a silent film, but with a really great score from Hans Zimmer in the background. But everything up until then, like the accent, his mannerisms, even the makeup and the way he carries himself, it's just offensive and it's terrible. So he had no chemistry with what's his face,
Armie
Hammer. Yeah, just terrible.
Armie Hammer.
All right, before we get out of here though for this segment, real quick, you get 30 seconds, and I'm especially timing you, Brendan. Any final thoughts on Johnny Depp in general as an actor? Cody, go.
I really hope that Black Mass is a turning point for him where he starts to take himself seriously and if he's going to do the makeup thing and try to do that, at least, try to add some nuance to it and not try to just be goofy because he's wearing a funny hat or whatever. I would like to see more nuanced performance, and he's totally capable of it, so I hope Black Mass is a turning point for him. I hope he gets enough accolades to say, hey, I think I should do that a little bit more.
All right, what about you, Brendan?
I agree, and I can't help but even say that as much as I don't like all the repetitive makeup performances he kind of gives, there is still some diversity going on, but I just really like when he's able to balance that with a purpose, like we talk about with maybe Ed Wood or Pirates of the Caribbean, or even Sweeney Todd. I think that's a great performance. So I'm still always intrigued by this guy. I think he's a very good actor. I just think he needs to learn when to pick those battles and to try and sometimes be able to balance it with a real performance like he did in Black Mass. He can have fun, but let's see some versatility. Let's see him balance that with a real performance every now and then and not just go for the Burtonisms, if you will. But I think he's still a good actor.
No, I completely agree. It's what I appreciate about what he was doing in Transcendence, because he tried to be a serious actor again, even though that movie's not great. It's what I appreciate about that. And I agree, he can do fun, but he's got to limit himself, be more versatile, and maybe even do some more animation. I liked what he did in Rango. So,
agreed.
Maybe he can give a shot at saying no to Tim Burton every once in a while, too.
That very much could help. So
I wonder if there's a contract out there that we don't know about, that they have like a 30-film deal or something.
Maybe. I think we could all agree, though, he's got talent. He just has to pick the right projects and take himself seriously. So,
yep.
There you go.
Well, all right. Let us know if you agree or disagree with what we had to say about Johnny Depp in our segment for best and worst performances for him. You can leave us a comment on Facebook or on Twitter, or you can email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com. But we'd love to hear what you have to say about Johnny Depp outside of just voting in the poll. What else do you have to say about him? We'd appreciate some feedback.
Absolutely. And before we get out of here, Cody, thanks so much for joining us, man. It was so great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, I will definitely come on anytime. I had a great time as well.
Absolutely. So where can people find you and your awesome stuff on the internet, man?
So you can look at CineSnob.net for written reviews, and if you want to check out our podcast called the CineSnob Podcast, you can go to iTunes, Stitcher, any of those places, and yeah, it's CineSnob, CineSnob. And you can find me on Twitter at CineSnob Cody, and also on Letterboxd with the same name.
Yeah, definitely go give these guys a follow. Really, really great stuff, Cody. I love your guys' written reviews and written stuff on your site. It's really smart, really well articulated. So,
thank you, sir.
Really good stuff. Definitely go give those guys a follow. And on that note, that should do it for this week's show. Again, just a friendly reminder to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/InSessionFilm. You can tweet us. I'm on there all the time at InSession Film. You can also find us on Google Plus and YouTube. Just search InSession Film and you'll find us. We do respond to every piece of email we get. So email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com and I'll get back to you right away. And sign up for our monthly newsletter. You can do that on Facebook by clicking the newsletter tab or on our site at InSessionFilm.com/newsletter.
And for more thoughts on the films that we watch, you can check us out on Letterboxd, which is at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm. You can also find us at the Lost at Home Podcast at lostatohomepodcast.com, where our good friends there have also been featuring our shows and reviews there every week. And we appreciate them doing so to help support us as well. You can also subscribe to us on iTunes and on Stitcher. While you are on iTunes, please leave us a review. We'd appreciate some feedback there as well. But you may want to check out Jabbercast, which is one of the best new podcast apps out there, and we'd appreciate you checking us out there as well. They've definitely been a big help for us there as well. You can also check us out on Listen Now, and our Listen Now page is on our website at InSessionFilm.com/listen-now.
And the InSession Film Podcast is supported by our super awesome listeners like you. Once again, if you want to help us, just go to our website at InSessionFilm.com, click on that bonus content tab in our main menu, and there you can hear our bonus content for just a small donation of 99 cents. You can check out the InSession Film store or just simply go to InSessionFilm.com/donate, and you'll see a bunch of information there and how you can help us. One thing that I would highly recommend is checking out our mobile app, where you can hear everything we do under one roof for just a one-time fee of $1.99. You can find that app on the Amazon Market for Android devices, the Windows 8 phone store for Windows devices, and the Podcast Box app for iOS devices. And again, all those details are on the site at InSessionFilm.com/apps. Brendan, what do we got next week on the show?
So next week, I'm a little disappointed because I really wanted to be hoping that we'd get Sicario in time, but apparently we're not going to be getting that for a wide release until not this coming weekend, but the weekend after that. So for this coming weekend, we will be taking a revisit to Mount Everest, which actually got a wide release this past weekend, but we haven't gotten a chance to review that yet, so we'll be taking a look and discussing that film on our next show for episode 136. Going off of that, for our top 3, we will be talking about, and this is going to sound kind of weird, but our top 3 favorite quote-unquote snowy films. So basically any film that has a representation of within either setting, plot, or story, whatever, where the setting of snow and cold and bitter and winter is going to play a huge factor into that. And I think that leaves a lot of open room for discussion that I think will make that top 3 very diverse and very interesting. So I look forward to that as well. And then for our discussion segment, we're looking to do a new segment called Let's Rethink This. And JD, I think you have something to say about that one.
Yeah, it's pretty similar to, if you guys ever listen to Simplistic Reviews podcast, they have a segment called, well, I can't say it because I'd have to bleep myself out, but essentially...
Say it.
Essentially what it is we'll bring up a topic, a news item, if you will, that let's just say needs a little bit rethinking. So we'll explain a little bit more on the show next week what we mean by that. But that's the basis of it, I guess. So, but I do look forward to Everest. I know there is an IMAX 3D screening not that far from us, so I am going to check that out, I think. So, don't know if I'm going to take the wife because she may go into labor after that experience, so we don't want to do that quite yet.
That's the wrong movie to have that happen to.
Exactly. So I may be experiencing that alone, but we'll see on that. Before we get out of here, though, let's toss it to you first, Cody. Any final thoughts on anything before we leave today?
No, I think that Black Mass is a film that is so close to being like I wanted to like it so bad, and I did like it, but I wanted to really like it.
Sure.
And I need to learn how to be a little bit more out of the box when I make my list, because you guys, as soon as you guys were saying that, I was like, man, I really missed the ball on that one.
Oh, it's all good, man.
You had a good list, man. I think it helped add some differences between some of our lists, even though we did have some repetition. But No, I think, your a profit pick, I think, was really the outside of the box thing there that really helped add some diversity to all of our lists with the 9 of ours combined. So I think that was a good job there.
And it was a great pick.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree.
What about you, Brendan? Any final thoughts?
For the glory of old state, for her founder strong and great, for the... I'm done.
Yeah, you should stop now. So. You guys got a long road ahead of you anyway, so as do we, though.
Big Ten, college football. That's it.
As far as final thoughts for me, I sent out a tweet earlier to Sean from No Totally, who's been on the show before, and I told him that if we got some new patrons this week on our Patreon page, which you can find at patreon.com/InSessionFilm, that if we get some new patrons, I will record a video of myself rapping to him, and I will put it out there for the world to see. So if you want to see me embarrass myself, sign up for our Patreon, and we'll make that happen. So that is my final thought.
I don't even want to see that happen. Don't do it. Don't do it. I'm scared for my life right now.
It could be frightening, but it could be funny. So we'll see. Anyway, go and check that out. Join us next week for Everest. And thanks, Cody, for joining us. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you guys next time on the InSession Film Podcast. For the entire version of our podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or on Stitcher, or check us out online at InSessionFilm.com.